Welcome back. We're excited to have you and start this next session on our supporting lives and livelihoods for the theme today. Today's general session, or this general session this afternoon, is really going to focus on some of the global and local impact that we've seen for small businesses. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation has been working very closely with our local communities, both domestically and internationally, through our local chambers and international chambers, supporting small businesses both pre and post disaster. We have a number of resources through our Resilience in a Box toolkit in partnership with UPS, as well as our disaster help desk for small business. Those resources you can find in the virtual platform or on our website. I'm excited today. We have a great agenda, starting with the acting administrator, John Barsa from USAID, who's going to provide some of the global perspective and partnerships on developing countries. Then followed by a conversation with Jennifer Gray Thompson from Rebuild North Bay Foundation, and Renae Hanvin for the corporate to community, who's joining from Australia. They're really going to focus on the effects of wildfires and the impacts on small businesses and some of the work that they've been doing to support those communities. And then finally, we'll finish with a word from Administrator Jovita Carranza from the Small Business Administration, talking about how SBA has been supporting local businesses during COVID-19. And then thank you to our partners. Obviously, this event would not be possible without FEMA, DHS, and Northcom, and so our partner Rob Glenn will be here to wrap us up for this session. Again, thank you to all of our sponsors and our community resilience and disaster response shape leaders for making this session possible. I hope that you check out the different sponsor meeting rooms, engage with them while they're in there, and have also been taking advantage of the virtual networking lounge and other connection opportunities that the platform provides. So with that, I would love to invite Acting Administrator Barsa onto the screen and really value his partnership. I know he will probably speak to you in a minute about his experience with DHS before coming to USAID, but has some experience with this event, actually. And do we still have Acting Administrator Barsa?
Hi. How's it going? I'm on. So, hey, Brooks, thank you so much for that introduction. Yes.
Absolutely. And hey, John, your screen is blocked a little bit by the paper. That's better. Now you're good.
Okay.
Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's always been a pleasure to do events at the Chamber, whether I've been in the public sector or private sector. The Chamber does a great job, public-private partnerships and coalitions. And as you mentioned, yes, I'm actually very passionate about this topic and this issue. As Brooks, as you mentioned, certainly I earned my spurs partially working public-private coalitions when I led the DHS Office of Public Liaison in the Bush administration. And then later on, when I served as the acting assistant secretary in PDAS at the Office of Partnership and Engagement in the Trump administration, where I worked very closely with Rob Glenn and I had the private sector office working for me at DHS at the headquarters level, trying to work on building these public-private partnerships. I fully understand the value in having the public and private sectors work together closely. So certainly I come to this, and I come to my position at USAID with an innate understanding of the value of building resilience through private sector partnerships. Deploying to disasters like Hurricane Katrina, Irma, Maria with FEMA, certainly, cemented in my mind the realization that organizations that did well were the ones that spent considerable amount of time on planning, preparedness, and building relationships prior to a disaster. Certainly today, we are faced with one of the most significant global health crises in recent memory. The United States is mobilized to fight COVID-19 both at home and abroad, committing more than $12.5 billion so far. Teams across our government, including USAID, the world's premier development agency, are working together as part of an all-America response. But what's important to know about America and USAID's response today is that we've been preparing for this moment for decades. When it comes to protecting the world's health security for more than half a century, the United States of America has led the way as the world's largest provider of health assistance. We've contributed more than $140 billion in global health assistance in the 21st century alone. These investments in global health throughout the decades have enabled partner countries to build capacity and strengthen health systems and democratic institutions, enabling them to better respond to global health crises. USAID has been on the front lines fighting many of these complex health emergencies, including the outbreaks of Ebola in West and Central Africa and the Zika response in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the outbreak of pneumonic plague in Madagascar. Throughout the years, we've built our operational technical expertise and learned some important lessons. Okay, so first of all, we certainly, one of the lessons is we need close partnerships with communities, civil society, NGOs, faith-based organizations, and the private sector to ensure effective response. And second, just as I learned at DHS, the countries that had prepared and planned and built resiliency and capacity to fight epidemics or any other stressors did better. We've learned that outbreaks and epidemics are often exacerbated by failures of governments and transparency. What experts will tell you is that Ebola in the eastern DRC is a governance crisis disguised as a health crisis. So furthering on the Ebola example, Ebola persists because of weak institutions, repression, instability, and a lack of development over many years. Other countries like Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda were able to respond and keep the disease out. While it's great that USAID and other government agencies are providing high quality, transparent, and meaningful assistance to support countries affected by COVID-19 and equip local communities with the tools needed to stop the spread of the virus, it's not enough. An all of America approach must include the generosity and ingenuity of private businesses, nonprofit groups, charities, faith-based organizations, and innovators. Together, so far, businesses and organizations have provided $4.6 billion in donations and assistance to fight COVID-19, accounting for nearly 80% of global philanthropic efforts. This all of America response is the right response. Fortunately, this type of response is also part of our DNA at USAID. We know that adding the power of the private enterprise and individual ingenuity to governmental efforts is the surest pathway to sustainable development. So the private sector has and will continue to play a large role in our capacity building and response efforts. All around the world, we're tapping into the innovation of private businesses to implement creative, market-based solutions to developmental challenges. And just as lessons we've learned in the past built resilience for today, the things we're doing today will build resilience for the disasters of tomorrow. In Nigeria, for example, USAID launched a partnership with cell phone provider Airtel to reach 1 million citizens a day with critical information via voice and text messages on physical distancing, safe hygiene practices, and other preventative measures to contain the spread of the disease. Now we're able to distribute the latest public health messaging instantly to millions, and we're building protocols and best practices for the future. All right, so I've talked about planning, preparedness, and building relationships. We're able to integrate the power of the private sector now because of a commitment we made 2 years ago to undertake a major cultural and operational transformation through the launch of the first ever agency-wide private sector engagement policy. This shift was a call to action to work hand in hand with the private sector to design and deliver our development and humanitarian programs in all sectors, and to harness our resources to open markets and other opportunities for U.S. businesses. We believe that a market-based approach and investment-driven development is a more sustainable way to empower people, communities, and countries on their journeys to self-reliance. Our private sector engagement is a strategic approach to international development through which USAID consults, strategizes, aligns, collaborates, and implements with the private sector for greater scale, sustainability, and effectiveness of developmental or humanitarian outcomes. It's an approach in which USAID works strategically with businesses and industries to address the most challenging development and humanitarian problems around the world. Okay, so a couple of examples of this in action. Last year, I announced a $25 million loan guarantee with the National Commercial Bank Jamaica Limited, NCB. This was created to support investments in small and medium enterprises in the area of energy resilience by increasing lending to individuals and companies across the Caribbean for renewable energy, power distribution, power generation projects, we're providing diverse, resilient, cost-effective, and secure energy across the Caribbean. We are building resilience and diversification. That's just an example of one sector in one geographic area. To combat COVID-19, USAID is also harnessing lessons we've learned and working to co-create and co-finance solutions with the private sector to achieve maximum speed, impact, and scale in our response. We always have the private sector in our mind as we come across to anything. So in this aspect, we're seeking collaborative solutions that leverage the private sector's expertise, unlock private investment, and catalyze innovation. To help accomplish this, we've created the Humanitarian Grand Challenge, which is a system which invests in new solutions to meet the needs of vulnerable populations in conflict zones. Through the Humanitarian Grand Challenge, USAID is crowdsourcing innovation. We're prioritizing collaborative solutions with local solvers and private sector partners, local and international, to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of humanitarian assistance to save lives. When the private sector engages, it is well equipped to do what it does best, which is to contribute expertise, technology, and other resources in cooperation with humanitarians to design, test, and scale new solutions that better address these needs. Through the Grand Challenge, our goal is to show the private sector that there is an opportunity to engage in complex environments based on humanitarian principles and priorities. The role of the private sector in humanitarian assistance is to apply solutions, utilize their valuable technical expertise, new solutions, risk management, and access to networks and data, just to name a few. By directly engaging the private sector, USAID has an opportunity to influence the private sector's navigation of the humanitarian sphere while supporting and guiding the development of appropriate and impactful private sector responses. USAID is also coordinating with U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, to mobilize private sector engagement opportunities and provide development finance solutions to the most critical challenges facing the developing world today. This is part of the broader U.S. government response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, partners with the private sector and utilizes its unique financing tools from debt and equity finance to political risk insurance and technical assistance to advance the treatment of patients, support economic recovery in affected communities, and help build communities that are more resilient to future health challenges. USAID, in turn, helps the DFC source and structure deals that mobilize funding from private investors to address and mitigate the second-order social, economic, and governance-related effects of COVID-19, all of which will be serious threats in the country's self-reliance. And speaking of second-order effects, the far-reaching impacts of COVID-19 are severely affecting economies, livelihoods, and investments in the countries in which we work. We're seeing it all over. And there's no blueprint that exists for solving the challenges brought on by this global pandemic. But one thing we know is that by tapping into the innovation of the private sector and implementing creative, market-based solutions, that's vital for mounting effective, timely, and comprehensive responses. We can't do this without the private sector. And to make it easier for innovators to contribute solutions, we've partnered with the Global Innovation Exchange to develop a COVID-19 website to provide a clearinghouse of innovations that can be applied to the response, as well as COVID-19 related funding opportunities. This response will support health systems, humanitarian assistance, economic security, and stabilization efforts worldwide. We also know that COVID-19 won't be the last pandemic, and as we consider how to prevent the next health crisis, we have to address the root causes of these outbreaks. Our main focus on USAID's efforts on helping partner countries on their journeys of self-reliance, and will continue to build on the vision that each one of our programs should look forward to the day when it can end. Our investments in global health throughout the decades are a cornerstone of this approach. Through USAID, our partners have built capacity and strengthened healthcare and democratic institutions to enable to respond better to global health crises. Looking long-term, we understand that COVID-19 will continue to have an impact around the world in the months and years to come. We remain committed to helping communities in our partner countries through this pandemic and its second and third order effects. The COVID-19 pandemic is not simply a health crisis, and our response cannot be just a health response. It's an economic, security, and governance crisis as well. While we continue to lead the global response to the immediate impacts of COVID-19, we must prepare for lasting changes to the economic, development, and humanitarian landscape. We must address disruptions to agricultural production, trade, and local markets, the loss of livelihoods, and deterioration of essential social services like water and sanitation, while building longer-term resilience. Each of these plays an important role in strengthening communities and fostering long-term resilience. To focus on operating in the COVID-altered world, I recently established a temporary agency planning cell called Over the Horizon to guide this effort. This Over the Horizon planning cell or task force will perform research, conduct outreach, and prepare analyses around key strategic questions to help USAID prepare for lasting challenges to the development and humanitarian landscape in the medium to long term. This is all well and good, but the truth is, it is only with and through the private sector that we can ever hope to mobilize the scale of resources fully needed to address the developmental and humanitarian challenges that the world faces. It is only in with and through the private sector that we will find the innovations needed to address those challenges. And it is only with and through the private sector that those solutions can ultimately be sustained. The United States has a vastly more powerful private sector than any other country. It is in our nation's best interest to do what we can to encourage more private investment in developing countries. And with sustained engagement in the private sector, we will lay the necessary groundwork for longer-term economic growth, prosperity, and self-reliance. We'll move even beyond resilience toward what Nassim Taleb called anti-fragility, where developing countries don't just survive, but thrive through shocks and shakeups. I ask all of you to continue to work with us. Please reach out and let us know how we can collaborate to enable the most promising solutions to mitigate the secondary impacts of COVID-19 in developing countries and helping build resilience throughout the world. Thank you so much for your attendance, and thank you so much for your time. Brooks, anybody?
Thank you. It's a real privilege to join the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and all the attendees at such an extraordinary time in our country. Just a few months after a global pandemic forced American commerce to a grinding halt, there are reasons to believe this economy is headed for a remarkable comeback. In May and June, more than 7.5 million new jobs were created, the two largest single-month job gains in history. This is a result of the President's decisive action to support American businesses. The Paycheck Protection Program provided a lifeline to nearly 5 million small business enterprises. It distributed more than $520 billion to mom and pop shops from coast to coast. It saved an estimated 51 million jobs, many of which would have otherwise been lost. Over a span of 3 months, the program has emerged as one of the most successful federal disaster relief efforts in history. It connected businesses with capital quickly, but what is truly remarkable is the equitable way in which this capital was dispersed. The White House, Treasury, and the SBA took extraordinary steps to ensure this program was accessible to everyone. We worked with 5,500 lenders, including more than 300 community development financial institutions and 170 minority depository institutions, lenders specializing in making capital available in socially and economically disadvantaged communities. And nearly 70% of PPP loans have gone to firms with fewer than 10 employees. Another critical action the President took to support small business was successfully negotiating the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. The USMCA is the largest, fairest, and most balanced trade agreement ever negotiated. It protects American workers from unfair trade, and it opens up vast new markets for small businesses. USMCA took effect this month, and the timing could not be better. This agreement is expected to add hundreds of thousands of jobs to the economy at a time when job creation is most needed. For the first time, an American trade agreement includes a dedicated chapter to small and medium-sized businesses, as well as other key provisions that support American entrepreneurs. I'm optimistic about the future, but of course, we are not out of the woods yet. We have a lot more work to do to get this economy back to pre-pandemic levels. But as a result of the President's commitment to keeping America's job creators front and center and his tireless efforts to advance pro-growth policies, economic recovery is happening. And based on the record-breaking jobs reports of the last 2 months, it's happening faster than anyone anticipated. Thank you for all your work in helping to propel this recovery forward. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for your time this afternoon. We heard from our keynote speakers on the gravity of the situation globally. The economic impact is being felt along with the health impact. Here at FEMA, our charge is to continue to sustain the federal response and our partners with HHS, CDC, and others in the interagency, along with our private sector partners, and then also our readiness for hurricane season. And so the National Business Emergency Operations Center that I'm responsible for and pleased to lead, we have more than 1,600 companies that are members. If you would like to be a member, it's been mentioned a couple of different times throughout this conference, is NBEOC at FEMA, at nbeoc@max.gov. You can also email nbeoc@fema.dhs.gov. And of course, you can find our contact information on fema.gov. Up next, we've got 3 great breakout sessions to answer some critical questions. That session is really intended to answer the question on, how many small businesses really do close after disaster? Is it 4%, 40%, 12%? We're going to get into that question in that breakout session. And then the supply chain, certainly throughout COVID-19 response ongoing, has received a great amount of stress, strain, but also we've seen some resilience within the supply chain. And so, trying to find out how to improve supply chain capabilities, how do we build a resilient supply chain? There will be a breakout session on that. And then lastly, how do you support COVID-19 and natural disaster response from an interoperability and a critical connectivity, supporting public safety and healthcare personnel? So those are the three breakout sessions starting at 1:30. There will be a break, and then starting at 3, we'll kick it off with stabilizing the community, the new essential worker, and then also hear about EarthX. So hopefully you do not have the typical problem of fear of missing out of sessions. That's one of the, I think, the opportunities for doing the conference this way this year. You can get these on YouTube and replay through all the different technologies that we've got for this conference. So thanks again for participating in the 9th annual conference, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you.